Beef and Besties. I'm Queen Scorpio. Today's topic is forming the land of no father. Now come on, get this tea while I sip my wine. Now, we have to go back to 1870s where black working class was thriving. They soared. You understand? Now, the majority of the jobs that were held by African American men for their families was unskilled. They were forced to work unskilled jobs. They may have had better education, went to a trade school to learn how to work a skilled job. They just were forced to work unskilled jobs, but they still was working. The fathers was in their home, providing for their families. Their kids were going to school, getting educated to become great professions, doctors, lawyers, and teachers, and whatever. They were buying homes. Now, this is the same time that the Black Wall Street was going on in 1865 to 1920, where the black elites was formed, creating generational wealth for their families. Now, in the 1900s, the Great Migration started, where the African American families that were in the South that could afford to or risk to leave the South to migrate north for better jobs and opportunities for themselves and their children did. They migrated north. Now, in the 40s, this is when deindustrialization began. It started in the 40s. Some of the jobs that majority of the African American men had to provide for their families began to move to the suburban areas or overseas. The ones in the suburban areas now require a degree from college to work these jobs. In 41, Roosevelt was forced to sign Executive Order 8802, which was no discrimination regardless of race, color, and creed in the workforce, especially in the manufacturing jobs. So the African American men who were forced to work unskilled jobs, who could go to trade school to learn to operate a skilled job, to get better jobs and get better pay to provide for their families generational wealth, they did. It was a good time for Negroes back then. Come on now, sip this tea. Now we get to the sticky situation. In the 1950s, this is where the public housing experiment took place. Now, it was originally for white families. They pulled an old bait and switch on a nigga. The Great Migration took place. Black families moved in. White flight took place. The white families that could afford to leave did. Go to the suburbs where the jobs were. Right? So, that's when the Pruitt Ideal Housing Project in St. Louis took form. 33 buildings, 11 stories. At the same time, during this public housing experiment with the Pruitt Ideal Housing Projects was another experiment going on called the Mouse Utopia Experiment. Get your pen and your paper. I want you to write this timeline down now. 1950, the public housing experiment, Pruitt's Ideal Projects in St. Louis, and the Mouse Utopia Experiment was performed by John Calhoun, but look at who financed. Dig deep, research deep, Rockefeller. Do your homework. Now, the Mouse Utopia Experiment, this is where they took a whole bunch of mice and put them in a utopia with unlimited food and water. And they were living their best micey lives. They were eating and drinking and reproducing, so much to the point where it became overpopulated. Once it became overpopulated, guess what happened? They started killing each other. All kind of sinister things started to happen in Mice City. But it was one generation of mice that was born that isolated themselves. Usually a lot of females guarded by one male. They weren't interested in sex, fighting, socializing, or even caring for their young. They call these generation of mice the beautiful ones. Okay? Now, during the Pruitt Housing Project's term, the Army was doing a chemical test at the height of the Cold War, where it was government blowers was spraying a powdery compound over these low-income high-rises and schools where 3/4 of the tenants were African-American families. 1/4 was still Caucasian families who couldn't afford the white flight with the rest of them. So it ain't a black and white issue, okay? Now, this powdery compound that they sprayed, people were getting asked questions that lived in the area. What is this? What's going on? So the government responded and they said it was a testing, a smoke screen, a shield aerial observation in case Russia decided to attack. Okay. They made another statement. That wasn't enough. People still ask the question, Russia, Russia, Russia. Where did Russia come in at? 1994, they put out another statement. And they said it was a biological weapon test because the city, the area, had great resemblance to a city in Russia the U.S. might attack. You see the flip-flopping, the wishy-washy, the inconsistency, the contradiction. So Lisa Martino seen the flip-flop, the wishy-washy, the inconsistency, and the contradiction. So she did her own research. They was teaching critical thinking back in the schools then. To think for yourselves, to dig, look for the truth, not just believe what the government telling you. So she did her research and she hooked up with Missouri Senator John McHugh, and they demanded answers from the U.S. Army, military, and the government. And what they got? Nothing. They ain't telling nothing. But the information that they did receive due to the Freedom of Information Act, they requested info, and in that information that they requested, it said that it was a densely populated slum district. That's why they did the testing. It was a slum district. It had a population of 3/4 of African American and 1/4 of Caucasian Americans. Not a black and white issue, people. Now keep in mind that this was after the Tuskegee experiment and the cut incident. All this was out, all this together. Think about all that. Now, the powdery substance, it was 2 tenants, Caucasian tenants, that lived in the Pruitt IDO housing project. Now, Mary Ellen Brindle and Space. Now, Space was born in 55. She lived on the top floor of the Pruitt IDO housing projects, where once the chemical powdery substance was sprayed with 6 months to a year, her father and 4 of her younger siblings died of coliform cancer. Now, Mary Ellen Brindle, as she began to grow up, she suffered from 4 different types of cancer: breast, thyroid, uterine, and skin cancer from the powdery chemical test compound that was being sprayed on the densely populated slum district that housed 1/4 Caucasian, 3/4 African American Negro family. Now here we go. Y'all ready? Let me sip my wine. In 1968, the Housing Act took place. This is the beginning of the destruction of the family unit in the Negro household, where the white flight took place. The new rule is that no families with children can live there now. So no fathers can live in the home, we'll cut you a check. Goddamn shit, we already took the nigga job, ain't got no job, what you gonna do? We'll provide for you, we'll give you a check. Let you stay in these nice little concrete cinder block projects that we built for you. You don't need them, we'll take care of you. Now, no fathers was in the home in the Housing Act of 1968, it was a requirement. No families with children. Families is a unit. Mother, father, children. The destruction of the family unit and the Negro black family. 1968 Housing Act. So now that you have single parents living in the projects with their kids without the fathers, 1970s, the recession hit. By this time, all the jobs are gone. All the manufacturing jobs are gone. What you gonna do? There's no work. The kids are educated. Opportunities are getting slim again. The Mouse Utopia is proving successful in the African American community. In the 1980s, crack hit. You know what happened then? All downward slope. So it was a point of time in the 1870s, early mid-1900s, where blacks was achieving a lot. By the time the 1880s get here, they were selling you black families on television. It was no longer that many black families held together, but they were selling it to you. The old bait switch, the old smoke screen, smoky mirrors, all that. Now I'm going to leave you with this. I'm going to leave you some homework. I want you to do some homework. Now, you ever wonder why they don't have analog clocks in the schools anymore? You know, the clocks with the numbers and big hand and little hand. They no longer teach cursive handwriting. They no longer teach critical thinking. Think for yourselves. How to strategize, come up with a plan. And they no longer teach economics. Economics is important to everybody. No matter your race, color, creed, gender. If you don't understand how the world works, how can you understand what's going on? Is it supposed to be going on? Is that the way it's supposed to go? You don't know. So your homework for tonight is your research. 1950s public housing experiment. The Pruitt IDO housing projects in St. Louis. Go back to the Great Migration, the 1900s. Don't forget the Mouse Utopia experiment by John Calhoun. Look it up. Told you those little black words on that white piece of paper not gonna hurt you. And that was the beginning of the land of no fathers. Until next time.